going to implement a router on a stick configuration, this time using a 2600 series router and a 1900 catalyst switch. And today we're going to implement 3 VLANs. Now remember that VLAN 1 is the administrative VLAN, so we can't use that. So we'll start with VLAN 2, VLAN 3, and VLAN 4. We have 2 hosts that we're going to place in each VLAN, and remember that those VLANs separate broadcast domains. So we'll have to implement routing so they can communicate with each other. The subnetting we're going to use is CIDR 28. Now remember, normal class C is CIDR 24, so CIDR 28 would give us a subnet mask of 240. 240 gives us a block value of 16. So notice our networks are going to be based on, for the first VLAN, VLAN 2, a block value of 16 and network 16. For the second VLAN, which will be VLAN 3, again based on our block value of 16, the network will be 32. And then for the third VLAN, or VLAN 4, based on a block value of 16, our network will be 48. So if our network is 16, then our gateway is going to be 17. That's the first valid IP. And then our addresses will be 18 and 19 respectively, and our gateway addresses will have to match for the router. Next, for the humans in network 32, our first valid IP would be 33. So that's going to be our gateway, and then 34 and 35 for our addresses. And finally, for the last network, network 48, our first valid address is going to be 49, which is our gateway, and then 50 for one host, and we're going to have again a gateway of 49 and 51 for the other hosts. Let's look at the switch port configuration. Again, remember we can't use the administrative VLAN, which is VLAN 1, so we have to start at VLAN 2. Therefore, our first VLAN, VLAN 2, will be SILAN 3 and SILAN 6. These 2 hosts are plugged into ports 1 and 2. Our next VLAN, VLAN 3, will be Human A and then Human S, so Apollo and Starbuck. And these will be plugged into ports 4 and 5. And then our third VLAN, VLAN 4, will be our hybrids, and they will be plugged into ports 7 and 8. Our fast Ethernet port 26 will go to our router for our router on a stick configuration, and on this interface, in this case 00, we'll implement sub-interfaces. Remember that on the 1900 switch, you can only do trunking on a fast Ethernet port, not Ethernet ports. So we don't really have a choice other than using 26 or 27 in this case. Let's log into our 1900 switch and set up some static VLANs. So logging in via the console port, I'll use K to go into user mode. Then I'll use the command enable to go into privilege mode. I'll use config T to go into global configuration mode. From global configuration mode, I'll use the command hostname, and we'll give it a hostname. And you don't do this on the other models of switches, but on the 1900, from global configuration mode, you can directly specify a VLAN. Remember, VLAN 1 is the administrative VLAN, so we can't, nor do we want to change that administrative VLAN or do anything there. So let's start at VLAN 2. VLAN 2 will be our first VLAN. VLAN 2, and let's give it a name. And in this case, we're going to put the SILANs in our very first VLAN, VLAN 2. So we'll simply call it SILANs. And let's make our next VLAN, and our second VLAN will be VLAN 3. And we're going to put the humans. Remember, we had humans in that VLAN. Okay, and we'll just call it humans. And our last VLAN, VLAN 4, is going to be hybrids. And the same thing here. So we're going to place all of these into their respective VLANs. So now we have 3 VLANs created in addition to the administrative VLAN that's there by default. And that's going to give us 3 separate broadcast domains. These VLANs are static VLANs, and I can confirm them and display the results of what we've done if I use the command show VLAN. So I'm going to do Control-Z to drop back down to privilege mode, and just use the command show VLAN. And notice now it displays my VLANs. So here's the administrative VLAN by default up here. And then we have SILANs, humans, and hybrids, and these are all static VLANs. Now we need to place our ports where our hosts are connected into their respective VLAN memberships. So once again, to do this, I'm going to go back to Global Configuration Mode. In Global Configuration Mode, I want to use the Interface command, and on the 1900, remember all those ports are Ethernet except for the 2 fast Ethernet ports. So for the very first port, I would specify E. I don't have any choice, it's going to be slot 0, and then port 1. Once I've selected that interface, now I can apply a VLAN membership to the interface. And the command for that would be VLAN-membership, and then it's going to be static membership. We're not using VTP in this case, and it was the very first VLAN, which was VLAN 2. Then the next thing I want to do is select the next port, and that's going to be interface E0/2 for the second port, and then I'll add my second Cylon. And again, it's going to be VLAN membership and static and 2. Same membership. And if I want to take a look at this real quick, I'm going to do Control-Z now and zoom back down to privilege mode, and I can do show VLAN to look at my VLAN database. And when I do this, notice now that ports are added, in this case 1 and 2, to the VLAN 2 or Cylon's VLAN. Let's verify those ports once again. In this case, our 2 hosts, Cylon 3, Cylon 6, are plugged into port 1 and 2, and that's our VLAN 2. Now our next VLAN, VLAN 3, consists of hosts plugged into ports 4 and 5, so we want to select those ports next. So let's bring our hyperterminal window back here, and let's go to Global Configuration Mode with config T and use our interface command. And remember, they were 4 and 5. 4 and 5 are where our hosts are plugged into. So we'll want to select those ports. So it's going to be Ethernet slot 0/4 for port 4, and the command I want to use is VLAN-membership, and it's going to be a static VLAN, and it's going to be 3 this time, our third VLAN. I also want to specify the next interface. Let's go ahead and select 5, so it'll be INT and then E0/5 to specify port 5, and it's going to be VLAN membership static and 3 as well. Okay, so we've placed those 2 ports into our second VLAN, VLAN 3, which is humans. And then finally, the last VLAN. Let's look at our ports there. So I'm going to move our hyperterminal window aside. Notice that the hybrids are plugged into ports 7 and 8, so we'll need to select those ports. So let's set up our VLAN membership on 7 and 8. And again, I'm going to do interface and then Ethernet and slot 0/7 and VLAN-membership static and 4. And now I want to select port 8, so it's going to be E0/8, and I want to do VLAN-membership static and 4. And then I'm just going to do a Control-Z to zoom back down to privilege mode. And I'm going to do a show VLAN to look at our VLAN database. Notice our ports here. So VLAN 2 Cylons is on ports 1 and 2, VLAN 3 humans is on ports 4 and 5, and VLAN 4 hybrids is on ports 7 and 8. Another command I can use to give me information about my VLAN database from privilege mode is show VLAN membership, and that would be show VLAN-membership. And if I do this, notice it gives me the static membership, and in this case on ports 1 and 2 they're members of VLAN 2. And 4 and 5 are members of VLAN 3, and 7 and 8 are members of VLAN 4. The next thing we need to do is set up our trunk link. And remember that when we use trunk links, we can't use slower Ethernet ports at 10 megabits per second. Our only option is to use one of the fast Ethernet ports on the 1900, and we can set up our trunk link here. So I'm going to choose port 26, and we're going to connect to our router's fast Ethernet 00 port. Now, mind you, we're going to use sub-interfaces here, so we're not actually really using that physical interface. So I want to log into my router via the console port, and I want to go into privilege mode with enable. and I want to go into global configuration mode with config T. And once I'm in global configuration mode, I want to select the appropriate port. In this case, use the interface command and fast Ethernet slot 0/port 26. And once I've selected that, notice I can turn on trunking with this command, and I would just want to say trunk on, but I'm going to use the help system, the question mark, just to show you the options. Here are options we've previously discussed in other presentations. Auto, desirable, non-negotiate, off and on. So just to look at those options. But we're going to make it a trunk port, so we're going to say trunk on. And once we do that, if we want to, we can zoom back down to privilege mode, and notice there's a show trunk command. And if I use the help system, there's a trunk A and a trunk B. And I'm going to choose trunk A in this case, and notice that the default encapsulation type is ISL. Now you'll see this on more primitive switches, but on Cisco's more modern switches, they're actually kind of leaving ISL behind and just going with 802.1q encapsulation. So for this model, ISL, other models, more commonly, you're going to use 802.1q. Now we need to implement our routing. So remember that we can't connect these slower 10 megabit per second Ethernet ports on the 1900 to the router. We have to use the faster 100 megabit per second fast Ethernet port for a trunk link. And that trunk link off port 26 is connected to fast Ethernet port 00 on the router. So let's log into the router via our console port. And we'll go into privilege mode and global configuration mode. Let's change the host name to something more desirable. And now I want to select an interface, and we're going to select the physical interface, which is slot 0 port 0. But we don't want to give it an IP address because we're not really using the physical interface, but we're going to do sub interfaces on it. So the only thing I want to do here is just no shutdown to bring up the port. And once I do that, now I'm going to select a sub interface for my first VLAN. And in this case, it's going to be int f slot 0/0 and a decimal value, and we'll do 0.1 for the first sub interface. And then once I select the sub interface, I want to specify the encapsulation. And I'm going to do encapsulation ISL, and I want to specify the VLAN number. So remember, our first VLAN is actually VLAN 2 because we can't use VLAN 1. That's the administrative VLAN on the switch. So our first VLAN is VLAN 2. So it's going to be encapsulation ISL 2. Once I do that, I want to specify the IP address. And that's going to be IP address. And let's look at our subnetting. Since we're using CIDR 18, that is a subnet mask value of 240 and therefore a block value of 16. So the first valid address we can use is going to be 17, and that's the gateway on the first network. All right, our first VLAN, VLAN 2. So it's going to be IP address 199.207.10 and 17 is our first valid IP. And a class C subnet mask that's subnetted on the last octet, 4 bits for the subnets and 4 bits for the hosts. And finally, I might add a descriptive string, which would simply be gateway to network and 16 VLAN 2 in this case, which is our first VLAN. Okay, and then that sub interface is done. Let me select the next sub interface, and that's going to be intf0/ and then 0.2, another decimal value. And I need to specify encapsulation and ISL, and VLAN 3 need to match the VLAN number exactly that I configured on the switch. The IP address is going to be, and remember that our next network, because of our subnet mask value of 240 and our block value of 16, is going to be 32, which means that our first valid IP address is 33, and that's the gateway of our next VLAN. So IP address and 199.207.10 and 33. And once again, a class C subnet mask, oops, extra 5 there. with 4 bits subnetted in the last octet, 4 bits for subnets, 4 bits for hosts, and we might give it a descriptive string as well, and we could call this one gateway to gateway to network and 32, and it's going to be blonde. Oh boy, I'm telling you, can't walk and chew gum at the same time. Can't type and talk at it. Okay, so VLAN 3. And then I want to select my last interface, which is going to be int f0/0.3, the next decimal value. And I want to specify my encapsulation. And it's going to be ISL. And remember that, I think we mentioned this before, but this is only supported on the 2600 series router and the 1900 Catalyst switch. If you use more modern equipment, Cisco is pretty much leaving ISL behind and going to all 802.1q. So it depends on the model that you're using whether or not you have this available. But just so we can try this out, we'll use this one. So again, our next VLAN is going to be VLAN 4. You want to match that exactly the way you numbered it or configured it on the switch. It's our third VLAN. Once again, though, we can't use VLAN 1. That's the administrative VLAN. So our third VLAN is actually VLAN 4. I want to specify the IP address, and that's going to be the next block value. So block value 16, that was network 16, that was network 32, this is network 48, which means the first valid IP we can use is 49, and that happens to be the gateway of our third VLAN, our third broadcast domain. So our IP address is 199.207.10.49, and a Class C subnet mask with the last octet subnetted on 4 bits, so 240, and we'll add another descriptive string, gateway to network and 48, and VLAN 4 we'll specify. Okay, I'm going to hit Control Z to go down to privilege mode, and we're going to save everything with a copy run start. Now everything is in the router. And let's look at our running configuration. If I do a show run, we'll go through this. Notice that in this case, 17, which is the gateway of network 1, broadcast domain 1, is set up for VLAN 2. Notice that our next gateway, 33, is set up for VLAN 3, and our next gateway, 49, is set up for VLAN 4. On our sub interfaces when we do our show run. Let's test things out right from the router. So I'm going to try to ping from privilege mode our very first network in VLAN 2, which was our first VLAN. So 199 and 207, and we'll pick Cylon a number 3 model, 10 and 18. And okay, 5 exclamation points, so everything looks good there. And let's try a model 6, which was 19. Looks good. Let's move our hyperterminal window over just a little bit. And now in our humans, our next VLAN, let's see if we can't reach a human as well. And so that was network 32, which the first valid address, the gateway address, is 33, which is on the router itself. And our first host, 34, is the human Apollo. Okay, and there we go with 5 echo replies. And let's try the next human here, 35. And there are our echo replies accordingly. And now our next network, remember that was 48, and our gateway was 49, so 50 and 51 were the hybrids. Let's see if we can't reach them. 50 and 51. So everything looks okay. Let's test it out. And so if I hop on here, notice that I'm on Cylon, and our Cylon is on our first network. That's in VLAN 2. And in VLAN 2, of course, we're on our own broadcast domain. Of course, I'd be able to ping somebody else in my same VLAN, 199.207.10.19. Okay, but without routing, I wouldn't be able to get outside my VLAN. Remember that each VLAN is a separate broadcast domain, so if I hadn't set up any routing on my sub-interfaces on my router and set up my trunk link, I wouldn't be able to reach anybody in this network, humans A, Apollo, or Starbuck. I wouldn't be able to reach my hybrids either. But because we've implemented and set up routing according to our VLANs and our subnet mask, let's test it out. So the next network, let's see if we can't reach the gateway, which was an adjacency on the router, 33. And we get our echo replies from the gateway of the next network. Now let's see if we can't reach the hosts in VLAN 3. Alright, and there's our second VLAN, VLAN 3, we get echo replies. Now let's try the next gateway, 49. And let's see if we can't reach the hosts in VLAN 4, now with our routing setup and encapsulation. So 50, echo replies, and 51. Everything looks hunky-dory. Now let's take a look at configuring VTP domains and modes on a 1900 Catalyst switch. Once again, I'll log into the console port, hit K for the command line, enable to go into privilege mode, and then I want to go into global configuration mode with config T or configure terminal. And now if I bring up the help system, notice the different options available to me. By default, a switch is in VTP server mode, but if I wanted, I could change it to client mode with the command VTP client. Now, if I'm in client mode, I can't create, modify, or delete VLANs. So I don't want to do that. I want to put it back in server mode. And to do that, I would simply specify VTP server. If I wanted to create a VTP domain, I could say VTP domain, and I'm just going to call this one Battle Stars. That'll be my VTP domain name. Now if I want to, I can drop down to privilege mode and look at my VTP domain information and mode. So I'm going to do Control Z and zoom back down to privilege mode, and I'm going to use the command show VTP to look at my status. And notice the maximum VLAN supported locally 1005, number of existing VLANs 4, my VTP domain name is Battlestars, my operating mode is server, so I can add and modify and delete VLANs. In addition to this, I could also delete, I could use the command delete VTP if I wanted to, and that would delete VTP information from the NVRAM or non-volatile RAM database. But when you're in server mode, all the changes you make to your VTP domain structure and your VLANs, they're stored in non-volatile RAM by default, at least on the 1900 Catalyst switch. Now different models do it different ways. So if I wanted to, for some reason, clear that information or reconfigure my router back to a factory default state, I could use the command delete VTP and then reset system with VTP parameters set to factory defaults. Oh no, we're going to kill all our VLANs. No, no, no. And I would say yes. And horrible. But if that's what you want, then that's what you got. And if I wanted to go ahead and remove or delete the contents of non-volatile RAM, again, I can do delete NVRAM and reset system with factory defaults, and I could say yes, and my VLANs are gone. But that's how you would configure VLANs and VTP settings on a 1900 Catalyst switch. Next, let's take a look at a 2950.